Revenge with Karen.
Your legacy code is trash, Derek sneered, flicking the projector remote like he was about to pitch a TED talk on mediocrity. The lights dimmed. A slide lit up the screen. System deprecation plan, final phase. Underneath it, a red X over Patricia's entire framework. 10 years of back-end architecture, compliance routing, and encryption protocols, reduced to a bullet point between UI refresh and snack budget increase. Patricia didn't flinch, not because it didn't hurt. Oh, it did. But because when you've survived 5 pivots, 3 rebrands, and 1 CEO who thought Python was a type of yoga, you learn how to mask dread behind a polite smile and a sip of lukewarm tea. Her hand stayed folded in her lap, index finger tapping once, then again, barely noticeable, unless you knew what she was counting. Eric strutted across the room in his overpriced sneakers, like a man who just finished watching a motivational reel titled Disrupt Her Before She Disrupts You. He was young, loud, and armed with buzzwords like scalability, microservices, and cutting edge. But for all his swagger, he missed one thing. Patricia had written the bones of the system in silence while he was still posting grind-set memes in his dorm. The future is speed, not sentiment, Derek said. Glancing at her like he expected applause for that little Instagram quote nugget. And frankly, Patricia, we need code that can evolve, not survive on duct tape and nostalgia. Someone actually chuckled. Patricia didn't turn to see who. She just breathed through her nose and made a mental note. They think it's over. Now, before we go deeper into this dumpster fire of arrogance and short-sightedness, I'm going to ask you for something simple. Hit that subscribe button. Seriously, 95% of you ghosts listening never do. And I get it, commitment is scary. But if watching a woman politely watch her career get tossed out by a man who thinks Docker is a boat doesn't deserve a like, then what does? You clicking that tiny button? That's like handing Patricia a digital high five. And trust me, she's earned it. Back in that sleek, glass boardroom, the CFO shifted uncomfortably. It'd seen Patricia save the company's backend more times than she could count. But nobody dared speak. Derek had the ear of the board now, and more importantly, he had a slide deck. That's all it takes to sink a career these days. A few pie charts, some technobabble, and a big enough ego to fill the silence when the system crashes. Patricia was told her transition support would no longer be needed after today. Derek announced it with all the grace of a man firing someone by emoji. HR nodded stiffly, their eyes avoiding hers like she was contagious with old age. She was to hand over her encryption keys by 5 p.m. and enjoy a generous severance for her years of service. And just like that, she was legacy trash, disposable, like a dusty old Rolodex or an AOL email. But here's the thing. Patricia didn't just write the legacy code. She lived it. Every patch was a story. Every undocumented line a contingency plan. And buried in one of those lines, nestled like a secret seed in the soil, was something Derek's entire modern stack had no idea existed. The validation hash. The thing that made the IPO system compliant. She stood, calm as ever, and looked directly at Derek, not like a woman being fired, but like a woman watching someone confidently walk into an elevator shaft thinking it's a hallway. "Good luck," she said, voice like velvet over razor blades. "I hope you know what you're doing." He didn't, but he'd find out. 9:30 a.m. tomorrow, to be exact. Opening bell, and not a single trade would clear. They came for her at 11:42 p.m. Not a minute sooner, not a second later, like some HR version of the Grim Reaper in J.Crew slacks and Fierce Sweat cologne. Patricia had stayed late, of course she had. The IPO was less than 10 hours away, while Derek was off giving a fireside podcast interview titled Rebuilding from the Ashes of Legacy. She was triple-checking log dependencies for the systems still running underneath his new patchwork kingdom. Because despite the smug declarations and the boardroom theatrics, not all of her code had been stripped out. Some of it still lived beneath the surface like an old tree root, quiet, twisted, necessary. The door opened behind her with that overly polite knock-knock, or not really knocking rhythm. It was Janet from HR. Poor thing looked like she'd rather be doing literally anything else. Her hair was frizzed from humidity or nerves, or maybe both, and her hands clutched a company-issued tablet like it might bite her. "Patricia, may I speak with you privately?" "Sure, Janet. Midnight's a great time to end a 10-year career. Perfect feng shui for a good all-corporate burial." They led her to conference room C like it was a morgue, empty but for a folder, a sad little fern, and a contractor from security standing awkwardly near the window, pretending not to be part of the firing squad. Someone had tried to make it feel humane by offering water. In a paper cup. Half full. Effective immediately, Janet began, reading like she was auditioning for the role of soulless bureaucrat #2. You're being let go as part of the final pre-IPO restructuring phase. Patricia didn't blink. She just folded her hands in her lap and waited. You'll receive your severance, Janet added, not meeting her eyes, once your encryption keys are turned over. It's company policy. Ah, there it was, the mask slipping. This wasn't just a goodbye, it was a handover. They wanted access. Everything Patricia had built, every private repository, every command string, every authentication hash, served up neat and tidy like the company dinner leftovers Derek would probably claim as his vision. Patricia reached into her bag, pulled out a flash drive, and placed it gently on the table like a communion wafer. It looked harmless, innocent, like it didn't hold the fate of a $2 billion IPO balanced on 6 lines of undocumented code. But it did. See, what Derek and his merry band of posturing code monkeys didn't realize was this. Patricia had built her system during regulatory chaos, when the SEC changed guidelines faster than TikTok trends. She didn't just write code. She wrote contingency. She didn't just design pipelines. She designed fail-safes, quiet little watchdogs built to detect tampering, cross-verify trades, and most importantly, hold the entire structure hostage if anything smelled off. The gatekeeper of that system, the validation hash. A string buried so deep, so specific, that unless you knew exactly how it interacted with Patricia's now deprecated modules, the entire compliance matrix would reject trade execution like a spleen rejecting a transplant. She never documented that part, and now she never would. She smiled, soft and eerie, and stood. Well, that's that. Janet looked relieved. The contractor shifted. Nobody said thank you. She exited the building, badge turned in, laptop surrendered, name removed from Slack channels before the elevator even hit the ground floor. Patricia didn't feel rage. She felt clarity. They thought legacy was a weakness. They thought replacing her with shiny frameworks and buzzword frameworks would clean the slate. But they forgot something crucial. Legacies bite back. Patricia watched from the comfort of her old leather armchair, one with a cigarette burn from 1998 and an armrest polished by years of quiet victories. The living room was dim, except for the soft blue glow of her second monitor, where a market news stream chattered on in pre-market ecstasy. TradeLift is poised to open at $94 a share, putting the company's valuation just north of $2 billion, the anchor gushed. This could be the biggest fintech IPO since. She muted it. Camera cut to Derek being interviewed live from the Nasdaq floor, all grins and gelled hair. We've rebuilt from the ground up, he said, confidence practically oozing through the screen. Our new backend stack is lightweight, efficient, and built for scale. The old codebase, well, let's just say we're not dragging any legacy baggage into the future. Patricia sipped her tea and opened her terminal. She wasn't there for vengeance. Not yet. Not exactly. She just wanted to watch. She wanted to see, moment by moment, what happened when a man who valued newness over understanding flipped the final switch without knowing what any of it actually did. And sure enough, her logs lit up. See, Patricia hadn't severed everything when they let her go. Legally, sure, but technically, there were still old diagnostic tunnels she'd written years ago during the compliance frenzy of 2016. Ghost scripts, auto-pingers, harmless little watchers embedded into forgotten corners of the infrastructure like spiderwebs behind crown molding. The alerts came in quietly at first. 9:04 a.m., unhandled API call /trade route 71, failed 9:07 a.m., dependency error. Auth module missing parameter H78 TOC 9:12 a.m., latency spike detected /region. NY East, they were small. Subtle, kind of things no one would notice unless they were looking. Patricia noticed. She opened a second window and began backing up her old documentation onto an encrypted drive. Not the version she'd handed over. The real one. The living one, with notes scribbled in margin text and password-protected modules annotated in code poetry only she could read. Meanwhile, inside TradeLift's HQ, chaos was starting to simmer just below the surface. New system was live. Derek had pushed it himself, bypassing QA. There hadn't been time for a full regression test, not when investors were sniffing around and the media blitz was already in motion. He didn't want anything slowing down the rollout, least of all paranoid legacy paranoia. The dev team had tried to speak up. They flagged it twice. "There's some weird latency on the compliance layer," one had whispered. "Probably just old junk," Derek snapped back. "Flush the cache and rerun deployment." So they did. They flushed. They deployed. And the ghosts got louder. Patricia saw the cache clear in real time, watched a clean wipe of the trade ledger logs, followed by a spike in error flags that wouldn't mean anything until it was too late. Until the system tried to talk to the SEX execution verifier and found nothing but dead air. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. On the TV, Derek was still talking. "Architecture ensures seamless integration with all regulatory endpoints. We've optimized trade flow, eliminated redundancies, and future-proofed the pipeline for international scale." Honestly, it's elegant. It was also wrong, because in all his elegance, he had gutted the part of the system that didn't look important, but was. The part that didn't show up in investor demos or clean slides. The part Patricia had written after a 5-day bender of coffee, SEC compliance calls, and one hellish bug that almost cost the company their license. That part, it lived in the hash gateway, the undocumented line that was never migrated, the gateway no one thought to ask about because no one even knew it existed, until they'd need it. Until 9:30. Patricia clicked her backup complete, labeled the drive, slid it into a drawer with a sticky note on top for when the house catches fire. And then she smiled, because they were about to learn what it really meant to cross a system built by someone who planned for everything. At exactly 9:30 a.m., the bell rang with all the pomp and ceremony of a coronation. Confetti cannons fired on the Nasdaq floor. Cameras zoomed in on Derek's overconfident grin. Traders hovered over terminals, like sprinters waiting for the gunshot. Anchors spoke in breathless excitement about historic valuation, market confidence, next-gen fintech innovation. And then nothing, not a flicker, not a blip. The stock ticker sat there like a dead goldfish at the bottom of a bowl. No price movement, no volume, no trades, just the ticker symbol, TLFT, flatlined on live television. At first, there was confusion. Traders refreshed their screens. Analysts tapped their keyboards harder, as though brute force might get the system's attention. Derek's smile twitched, but didn't drop, not yet. He puffed himself up, waving off questions from journalists. "It's a brief delay," he assured them. "Normal congestion. Happens all the time." But the truth was immediate, unmistakable, and catastrophic. The first shout came from the trading pit. "Orders aren't executing." Another voice, "No validations coming back." A third, "Is the compliance endpoint down?" Within 60 seconds, the entire floor was vibrating with panic. Phone calls started pouring in from institutional investors demanding explanations. Brokers slammed headsets on. Assistants ran between desks like frantic nurses in an ER where every patient was coding at once. The screens flickered again, they showed red system errors. On live television, someone cut the feed. Derek stopped smiling. Across town, in her quiet living room, Patricia watched it unfold with a stillness that bordered on serene. She didn't grin. She didn't clap. Just exhaled, slow, controlled, the way a person does when a long-ignored truth finally punches its way to the surface. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mark, one of the back-end devs she mentored back in the days when people actually knew how their own systems worked. "Patricia, please tell me you didn't encrypt anything weird." She stared at the message for a long, thoughtful second. "Weird? No. Necessary? Absolutely." She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she turned up the volume on the muted TV. The financial network had scrambled back on air. The anchor looked rattled, makeup cracking at the edges under studio lights. "We're hearing unconfirmed reports that TradeLift's trade verification system is failing to acknowledge submitted orders. This is highly unusual. We're awaiting comment from their engineering leadership." Cut to Derek, on the floor, pale and sweating, whispering aggressively into his phone as if volume could force the universe to comply. Behind him, an SEC auditor appeared on-screen, expression neutral, clipboard in hand. He walked up to a console operator, pointed at a system alert, and asked one question Patricia could read from his lips even without audio. "Where is the validation hash?" She could imagine it now, the silence that followed, the widening eyes, a cold ripple of dread moving through the room like an icy fog. "Oh, Derek, sweet summer child, you can rewrite the future. You can migrate the systems. You can purge the legacy. But if you don't understand the bones, the roots, the hidden arteries, everything collapses the moment it needs to stand on its own." Patricia rose from her chair, stretched her back, and glanced at the clock. 9:37 a.m., right on schedule. Her phone buzzed again, different sender this time. Another dev? What did they do? Why isn't anything clearing? She let the phone buzz on the table, let them sweat. Let them finally, painfully understand what legacy trash really ran underneath their empire. She walked to the kitchen, put on the kettle, and listened to the faint screaming of a global IPO imploding through her speakers with the quiet satisfaction of a gardener watching weeds finally uproot themselves. Fallout had begun. And no one, not Derek, not the board, not the frantic investors, knew the half of it yet. It's a glitch, Derek snapped, voice just shy of cracking as he shoved past a trembling junior engineer and stormed toward the DevOps pod. Platform API congestion, nothing more. Reset the load balancers and redeploy the trading container. Now, the team scrambled. You could smell the panic in the air, sweaty, metallic, and desperate. Someone knocked over a Red Bull trying to rerun the staging environment. Another dev tried to whisper that they didn't have staging anymore. It had been absorbed into prod live-all during Derek's clean slate architecture purge. Just fix it, Derek hissed. We go live again in 5 minutes. No screw-ups. Across the glass, the trading floor looked like a zoo after a fire drill. Phones off the hook. Analysts white-knuckling their chairs. A room full of men in $1,000 suits realizing they couldn't execute a single order. Live feeds had been pulled. External comms teams were crafting language. The company's big debut, frozen, motionless, embarrassing. Back in Patricia's home, the kettle hissed gently on the stove. She poured herself a cup of chamomile, added honey, and turned her attention to her second monitor. Now tuned to a live stream, someone was leaking from inside TradeLift HQ. The audio was rough, the angle skewed, but she could see everything she needed to. Especially the moment he walked in. Not Derek, him, SEC auditor. Patricia didn't know his name, but she knew the look. Salt and pepper buzz cut, navy suit, a clipboard held like a scalpel. The kind of man who never yelled because he didn't need to. When he walked into a room, careers walked out. He moved with calm precision into the server room, a place now half abandoned by the devs who were huddled around Derek's war table like cult members hoping for a miracle. Patricia leaned forward, eyes narrowing. On screen, the auditor stopped in front of the primary interface. He tapped the console, read the logs, cross-checked the internal trade request queue against the outbound verification system. His finger hovered for a second. Then he turned. What's the hash input field? The dev closest to him blinked. Hash, yes, the auditor said, unfazed. The validation hash, for trade execution. Where is it? Now everyone froze. Patricia could almost hear the silence from her living room. Derek walked into frame, chest puffed, trying to recover control of the room. We don't use hashes anymore. We rebuilt everything. Our new system uses token-based verification. The auditor cut him off with a glance that could peel paint. You're a publicly traded platform handling verified trades under SEC jurisdiction. That requires cryptographic validation for all order executions. The hash is the control checkpoint. It's non-optional. Where is it? Eric's mouth opened, closed. A twitch formed beneath his right eye. What validation hash? There it was. The exact phrase Patricia had waited for. Like the moment a magician finally realized he'd sawed the wrong assistant in half. The auditor didn't react. He simply scribbled something on his clipboard, handed it to a regulatory staffer, and turned back to the console. This system is non-compliant, he said calmly. Can't execute trades without the original validation mechanism. It's not just about functionality, it's about legality, traceability. You've launched without a legally binding verification layer. Derek's face looked like someone had unplugged his bloodstream. Patricia sipped her tea and nodded once, because this wasn't just about being right. It was about watching the man who called her life's work trash try to outrun a fire he couldn't even see. Thought buzzwords and Docker containers could replace understanding. He thought legacy meant obsolete. He forgot that what's old isn't always broken. Sometimes, it's the only thing keeping the house standing. The phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a dev. It was the CFO. And the subject line was just one word, help. Patricia didn't reply. Not yet. Let them simmer a little longer. False hope had just run headfirst into real consequences. The next wave was going to hit harder. The room had gone from crisis to reckoning. The SEC wasn't yelling. That would have been merciful. Instead, they were doing what they did best, asking quiet, surgical questions while their auditors clicked through logs like surgeons cutting through soft tissue. The kind of silence that didn't scream, but hummed with a single truth. You're screwed, and we know exactly where the knife went in. one by one. Red flags bloomed across the internal dashboard. Compliance scripts were either misfiring or entirely absent. Audit trails were broken mid-chain. Trade requests were getting stuck at checkpoints no one in Derek's new stack could identify. Every time the system tried to verify a transaction, it ran into a hole, like someone had yanked out the keystone from a stone arch. And now everyone was standing underneath, wondering why the sky looked a little closer. Then they found it, Patricia's module, still present, still embedded, still quietly trying to do its job in the dark. Line after line of legacy code blinking quietly in a folder some junior dev had marked Archive Legacy Compliance Do Not Touch. Except Derek had touched it, had overwritten parts of it, had tried to rip it out without understanding what he was holding. Because buried deep inside that folder was the validation hash gateway, thing that authenticated every trade packet before it was legally allowed to ping the SEC's execution queue. Without it, the system didn't just fail to work, it failed to exist in the eyes of the law. A board member, the one with the silver beard and old money watch, finally spoke. Why wasn't this preserved? No one answered. The CTO blinked, swallowed, tried to make his voice sound like confidence instead of wet cardboard. We deprecated that module during the transition to the new architecture. It was redundant. We believed it was legacy bloat. The same board member turned slowly toward him. Redundant, he said, voice flat as glass. It's the only module talking to the federal government. Another member chimed in, this one from the legal side. Do you even know how many disclosures this triggers? You launched an IPO on a system that can't clear trades. You understand the scale of liability we're staring down. Derek's jaw moved like he was trying to chew a ghost. We need to call her, the CFO finally said. She looked tired, not just from today, but from everything leading up to this, every ignored memo, every time someone like Patricia had warned and been waved off like a mosquito at a pool party. Call her, the board chair said. Now, Derek didn't want to. Pride is funny like that. Let a man burn his own house down just to prove he didn't need the woman who built it. But the auditors were still watching, and the clock was ticking. So he pulled out his phone, dialed her number, pressed it to his ear. Rings, no answer. He tried again. Straight to voicemail. Patricia, hi, this is Derek. Listen, I know things ended kind of abruptly, but we could really use your insight right now. There's been some confusion. If you could call me back as soon as possible, that'd be great, thanks. He hung up and tried not to throw his phone against the wall. Across the city, in a modest 2-bedroom bungalow with a squeaky screen door and a dog snoring on the couch, Patricia was elbow-deep in flour and butter. The pie crust was coming together beautifully. She wore an apron that said "Kiss the Coder." Her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't even glance at it. Instead, she hummed softly and shaped the edges of the crust, folding it just so, like the crease of an origami swan. In the background, a podcast played, some episode about late bloomers who end up changing the world after 50. Fitting. The phone buzzed again, then again. She wiped her hands, opened the oven, and slid the pie inside. Warmth filled the kitchen. She sat, sipped her tea, and stared out the window. Derek would call again, and eventually he'd beg. But not yet. Let him squirm. Let him explain to the board why the woman he called legacy trash was the only person who could save his reputation, his IPO, and if she was feeling merciful, his job. She was in no rush. The pie had 30 more minutes. Plenty of time for karma to finish preheating. The call came at 4:13 p.m., just as Patricia was cutting steam vents into the top of her freshly baked peach pie, with the precision of a neurosurgeon and the patience of a saint. Buzz. Phone lit up on the counter. Caller ID, Sharon Kim, CFO, Tradelift Inc. She ignored it. 3 minutes later, Mark Halpern, SEC Counsel, External Affairs. Ignored that too. Then came the text, please call us, it's urgent. The board has approved discretionary authority for a consulting arrangement. Whatever it takes. Patricia set down the paring knife and peeled off her oven mitts with slow, deliberate grace. She poured herself another cup of tea, just the way she liked, and sat at the kitchen table, while the entire upper echelon of Tradelift spun themselves into a tailspin 14 floors above downtown traffic. Let them sweat a little longer. She opened her laptop, the same one they'd been so eager to reclaim 2 nights ago. It had a deep scratch across the trackpad and a folder titled Just in Case. She clicked it. Inside was everything: old architecture diagrams, validation gateway scripts, annotated hash string templates, even compliance dialogue trees she'd used during the 2018 SEC audit when their previous CTO accidentally routed every overseas trade through Belize. She pulled up a blank document and started typing. Consulting agreement, Patricia L. Monroe. She didn't rush. She'd waited a decade for this moment. She wasn't about to undersell herself in the final act. First line, all consulting activities are subject to her full discretion and timeline. No emergency pushes, no 4 a.m. Slack pings. Second, compensation, $7 million flat, upfront, non-refundable. Third, status, senior compliance consultant, no less, reporting directly to board chair. CTO to provide daily compliance logs, apologize in writing for unprofessional conduct, be removed from all audit-related decision-making until further notice. Fourth, duration, 90-day control window. All system documentation, including future migrations, subject to her oversight. Fifth, revocation clause. She could walk at any time if any exec or board member referred to her work as legacy again. She was halfway through item 6 when her phone buzzed again. This time it was Sharon, the CFO, leaving a voicemail. The tone was different now, lower, humbler. It wasn't corporate damage control. It was desperation wrapped in diplomacy. Patricia, we know what we lost. We know you built the spine of this company. We were wrong to let you go, and we're hoping sincerely that you'll come in and help us stabilize the platform. The IPO's in critical condition. We'll meet any terms, just name them. Patricia played it twice, then once more, just for pleasure. Across the city, in Tradelift's corner office, Eric sat slumped in a chair, tie loose, laptop open, blinking at system logs he didn't understand. His stack had failed. His API layer had buckled. His brilliant rewrite had locked out regulatory compliance so badly the SEC was considering a temporary suspension of their trading license. Investors were fuming. Analysts were circling like vultures. And all he could do now was wait for the woman he mocked to save him. Patricia finally responded at 5:09 p.m. Attached, please find my terms. All 9 must be agreed to in writing by 7:00 p.m. or offer expires. I'll expect a car by 8:00. I do not want to see or speak to Derek. If he's in the building, I walk. She hit send, closed the laptop, and returned to her pie, which had cooled just enough to slice. As the knife went through, clean and golden, she allowed herself one small smile. 'Cause power isn't loud. It isn't messy. It doesn't show its hand or raise its voice. Power is quiet. It's the moment the empire you built, then were fired from, calls you back, blank check in hand, asking for the map out of the mess they made without you. And this time, you set the terms. At precisely 8:57 a.m., the elevator doors opened on the top floor of Tradelift's headquarters, and Patricia stepped out like she'd never left. Immaculate, calm, tailored navy slacks, pressed blouse, her graying hair swept back in a way that made her look less like someone returning to work, and more like someone returning to claim what was hers. No badge, no lanyard, she didn't need one. The 2 security guards flanking the lobby rose instinctively, whether in respect or uncertainty, it didn't matter. The receptionist, who'd watched her badge get deactivated 36 hours prior, blinked like she was seeing a ghost in daylight. Boardroom? Patricia asked, her voice light, almost amused. Yes, ma'am. They're all waiting for you. Of course they were. She walked down the hallway at the same measured pace she'd always had, like nothing could rush her and everything would wait if it had any sense. In her left hand was a leather portfolio. In her right, a small USB drive that looked utterly unremarkable, unless you happened to be one of the 147 people currently sweating bullets over the non-functional IPO infrastructure it could bring back to life. The boardroom doors opened without ceremony. Inside, the full circus had assembled. CFO, legal, PR, investor relations, 3 board members, and in the far corner, arms crossed and jaw tight enough to crack enamel, Derek. He hadn't been removed. Yet, his chair was noticeably farther from the head of the table than it had been on launch day. Patricia walked in without breaking stride, placed the USB in front of the board chair, and handed the CFO a crisp manila folder. Terms, she said simply. The board chair opened it, eyes scanned. Eyebrows rose, but no objections came. Not at $7 million bonus payable within 24 hours. Not at 90-day audit oversight. Certainly not at CTO to report directly to consultant during compliance restoration. Derek finally spoke. This is absurd. She's extorting us. Patricia didn't look at him. Didn't need to. The SEC auditor, seated beside legal, calmly adjusted his tie and looked at Derek with the dead-eyed precision of a man who'd read too many compliance violations in one lifetime. "You had your shot," he said flatly. "Launched an IPO without a trade validation layer. You misrepresented compliance architecture to the board and the press. If Miss Monroe doesn't restore this system under her terms, I'll be recommending an immediate trading halt and initiating a fraud inquiry." Silence. Derek sat back down, very slowly. The board chair turned to Patricia. "Will this fix it?" Patricia gave a small nod. "Once my system is reinstated and configured properly, trades will resume. Everything will run clean. And yes, this time you'll have your validation hash." A quiet beat. Then the CFO said, almost too softly, "We're very sorry, Patricia." Patricia looked her in the eye. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to stabilize what you almost killed." She walked to the head of the table, Derek's old seat, and sat down without asking, plugged in the drive, typed 3 commands. On the monitor behind her, the trading ticker flickered, paused, then movement. Single trade cleared, then another. Then the floodgates opened. Within 30 seconds, TradeLift's IPO, flatlined for nearly 24 hours, roared to life. The screen danced with movement, price crawling north, investors rushing back in, phones ringing again across the building like the return of a long-lost pulse. Nobody said a word. They didn't have to. The SEC auditor made a small note on his clipboard. Validation hash confirmed. Derek looked like he'd been exiled from his own body. The PR director exhaled like someone who'd been holding their breath since the Renaissance. One of the board members actually whispered, "Holy hell." Patricia sipped from the travel mug she'd brought, tea of course, and finally glanced at Derek for the first time since she'd entered the room. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just said, soft and razor clean, "Next time you call something trash, make sure you understand what it's holding up." And with that, she turned back to her screen, fingers poised to continue the resurrection. Public vindication, private triumph, and tomorrow, she'd start the real audit. By 9:02 a.m., the boardroom had the tense stillness of a submarine holding its breath. Everyone watched the screen like it was a live feed from a heart monitor. Patricia stood beside the terminal, her fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. It already restored the hash gateway script, reinitialized the compliance anchor point, and manually triggered the handshake to the sex trade clearing API, something Derek's clean stack had entirely overwritten. The final step was deceptively simple. Plug in the drive, so she did. The system hesitated, a flicker. Then a command line opened, and a line of green text appeared. Validation hash authenticated. Trading compliance established. Orders resuming, the first order cleared. Then the next. Within seconds, the boardroom monitor lit up like Christmas Eve on Wall Street. The TradeLift ticker exploded with movement, volume flowing, trades executing, price stabilizing in real time. It was like watching blood pump back into a body moments after the defibrillator hit. Someone gasped. Another whispered, "She did it." No one cheered, because this wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning. Phones across the floor outside the boardroom started lighting up. Investors calling, analysts updating projections, media outlets scrambling to rewrite headlines. Downstairs, the trading floor erupted into a stunned wave of relieved murmurs. On the office TV behind them, a financial anchor, this time with forced calm, read from the teleprompter. "We're getting word that TradeLift's IPO has resumed after a brief technical glitch delayed trading activity. Company representatives have not commented, but early indications suggest systems are now stable." Patricia didn't look at the TV. She didn't need to. The real show was behind her. Derek sat in the far corner of the boardroom, arms crossed, pale as chalk. His mouth was slightly open, caught between outrage and disbelief. You could almost hear the cogs turning, desperate for a way to spin this, a way to deny what just happened in front of everyone. The SEC auditor didn't bother masking his disgust. He leaned in slowly, just close enough for Derek to hear without the rest of the room catching it. "Next time you fire someone," he said quietly, "make sure you understand what they built." Then he turned away and began packing up his notes, satisfied. The rest of the board avoided Derek's gaze like it might burn. One of them stood up, crossed the room, and shook Patricia's hand. "Thank you," he said. "No embellishment. Just humbled gratitude." Patricia nodded once, then turned back to her terminal and shut it down with a final keystroke. The screen went dark, not out of failure, but completion. She gathered her drive, closed her portfolio, and took one last sip from her mug. And then, only then, did she walk past Derek. She didn't stop. but she did turn just enough to meet his eyes. What he saw wasn't smugness or anger, it was something worse. Mercy. Sometimes, she said with a voice so smooth it could have sliced glass. The trash is the only thing keeping the machine from burning down. Then she walked out. No applause, no ceremony, just the soft click of the boardroom door closing behind her and the weight of every word left hanging in the air. Full circle dominance. Quiet, precise, and utterly devastating. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.